Hello, I'm Liz Brown. Welcome to the summer edition of the Bourne Community Engagement Committee show, A Canal Runs Through It. Today, I'll be speaking with Mr. Joe Yukna, who is leading efforts to find the Cape Cod Military Museum a permanent home. Today, I'll be talking with him about their recent fundraiser and future hopes and plans. I'm also going to be heading out to visit the location of a lost bit of Bourne's theater history. Now let's take a look at some of the great events that have been happening in Bourne over the past few months. Been a great spring. I hope you were able to enjoy some of those events. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Joe Yukna, who is currently spearheading efforts to breathe new life into the Cape Cod Military Museum. Cape Cod is rich in military history, and the Cape Cod Military Museum is working to collect and preserve military memorabilia and provide education about that history. Joe, let's begin by reviewing the history of efforts to establish and fund the museum. And do you think you told me that you've been involved since the very beginning?
Yes,
Yeah.
It started actually last century. I was a Department of Defense police officer on the base in the late 80s, early 90s, and I'd drive around. And at that time, all the thousands of World War II buildings were still standing, many askew and tilted and on the way down, but there was still quite a few left. And I always wondered what on earth happened here, because I hadn't heard much about it, even though it's a Massachusetts native. And so I started spearheading a group trying to get the military museum established. In August of 2001, we were given 6 acres, two-story barracks by General Carter, and of course in September of 2001, 9/11, and the base was no longer open.
Oh, yes.
So you can't have a museum that people can't get to, and that knocked us back quite a bit. We've had some fits and starts as to finding a permanent location. However, we are very active in the community. I do a lecture series, and I just added a new lecture that's not on our brochure.
Because this is his lecture series brochure.
Thank you, we need that content.
Mm-hmm.
On the 57th Signal Battalion, I just had the honor of doing this lecture to the actual unit that's still active down in Texas. They came up to commemorate their founding, and they asked me to do a research lecture on it. And it was so good, I ended up I'm going to incorporate it, and that's going to be our next lecture, public lecture we're going to do. And the reason we're doing it is the 57th Signal Battalion was formed, the original cadre was mainly men of Massachusetts. And they formed in February of 1941, but didn't go overseas till January of 43. So they were on Cape Cod in Camp Edwards for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. So it's a natural tie-in. And it goes to an area of World War II that I haven't talked about much, because they went to Salerno, Anzio, and then Operation Dragoon through southern France into Germany and Austria that way. So it'll be very interesting if you've attended any of my lectures. It's a totally new area for us.
So when you did have the museum open on the base,
We didn't.
It never
we
got
had
there.
just been
Okay.
granted
Oh,
the
dear.
2 barracks, and
Okay.
literally 3 weeks later, they hit the fan.
And the reason I bring that up is I was talking to Mr. Ellis at your fundraiser at the Coonamessett, and he was mentioning how, you know, you're still collecting things like our friends back here. Could you introduce them, please?
This is Headless Hank, who is wearing the uniform of a Coast Guardsman in the Army for the Engineer Amphibian Command. And this is Headless Helen, who's wearing a WAC outfit, who was in the Army Air Force in the Philippines.
Oh, interesting. So what he was saying, and I think, you know, it would apply to these, is that, you know, you get an item, say, you know, the helmet, but along with the item comes a story and maybe some other bits and pieces of that story. And it's hard to curate that if you don't have a place where you can sort of show everything together. Is that true?
Yeah, we have a collection. We have hundreds of uniforms. We have a landing craft we're trying to make into a memorial. A
is
duck
that
boat.
the one that's over by
No,
the...
we have a
another
landing,
one. Okay.
That's a duck. We have a landing craft, the
Okay.
ramp drop, Saving Private Ryan, we want to turn into a memorial.
Because some of our Bourne viewers probably have seen
The
other
duck,
one
yes.
quite a bit, I'm expecting. Yeah.
The biggest thing we have, besides photographs, is the stories. We have a gazillion stories for things that happened right here on Cape Cod, and we also follow the men that trained here and what they did overseas. We're going to primarily focus on World War II, but we're not exclusively limited to World War II. It was a SAC base. They had nuclear missiles on the base.
It's been a lot of things, right?
The Coast Guard is still there. They had radar stations on oil rigs off the coast. One of them capsized and sunk during a storm, killing 27 men. So we have more than World War II, but I'm going to go into one interesting World War II story that involves the canal. The Collier, the R. Jones, and Collier means a ship that transports coal. We know an oil tanker is called an oiler, and the Collier, a lot of the ships were still, and a lot of the locomotives were still coal-fired. So this is a very long ship full with coal, and the captain came to the south end of the canal. He had a license to traverse the canal, so he wanted to save the company a little money and not bring a pilot on to guide the craft through the canal.
Bad idea, probably.
It turned out being a terrible idea. So he's taking the Collier through the canal, and as anyone in Bourne knows, there are times when the tides change and the waters become very swirly, and that happened to this captain mid-transit. He ground out and hold the bottom of his ship. It sank to deck level on the side of the canal. They contacted the owner, who happened to be in Connecticut. He rushed up, and his daughter came on a Sunday in her best Sunday dress. The tide switched again, and it actually turned the ship completely sideways, blocking the canal, and it sank completely out of sight. 3 of the crewmen on the ship didn't know how to swim. They jumped off, and his daughter, the 16-year-old daughter of the owner of the ship, jumped in the canal and saved 3 of the sailors.
That's amazing, because swimming in that canal, you know, you hear about it every once in a while, and you think,
it gets better.
okay.
The sailors, in gratitude for rescuing them, gave her the ship's dog, who swam off by himself, whose name was Shipwreck, actually, because they had found him on a wreck
So
earlier.
he knew what to do, yeah.
So what do you do with a huge 300-foot ship that's blocking the canal?
What do you do?
You can't call a tow truck.
No.
They dynamited it in place.
Really?
So they kept putting dynamite on it, blowing it up, putting dynamite on it, blowing it up. It took 2 weeks to make it so the canal was navigable. Now,
Are those pieces there?
I'm sure they're a piece of that hull.
Interesting. Yeah.
They're, smithereens, they're blown to smithereens, but I'm sure the bottom was deep enough they didn't care. They stopped at some point. Now, what people don't realize is Cape Cod Bay and Buzzards Bay were both enclosed in steel anti-submarine nets.
Oh, no, I didn't know
So
that.
convoys were doing what's called the bucket brigade because of the U-boat activity off of our coast, and they were going from New York into Buzzards Bay through the canal, then they go from Buzzards Bay to Halifax, and then from Richmond to New York. These are areas you could travel in a day because during the day they had a much better chance of defending the convoys from the U-boats. So you have this convoy that was all set to go through the canal and then go through Cape Cod Bay to Halifax, where the convoys formed to go over to England. Well, the canal was blocked. So this convoy had to go around the Cape. And as it went around the Cape, it ran into a very interesting, very rare German U-boat. This was a U-boat designed to lay mines in enemy harbors. The captain of the U-boat didn't expect to see a convoy because they knew all the convoys came out of Cape Cod Bay.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So he couldn't resist this target, and he fired his torpedoes, and he sank the Liberty ship called Malcolm. And 11 men, I think, were killed.
Yeah, I think I've heard a little bit of this part.
The convoy continued on, but one of the reverse Lend-Lease, the British gave us armed trawlers for convoy escort. So there's British crewed ships to help escort our convoys because they had much more experience with convoys because they've been doing it for quite a while. Rescued the crew of the Malcolm on the armed trawler called Le Tigre, French for the tiger. They were so close to Woods Hole, they said instead of taking these guys all the way to Halifax, we're going to bring them to Woods Hole. The U-boat, knowing the convoy was heading north to Halifax, after it fired its torpedoes, turned, submerged, and went south, knowing that the convoy would have to move on and the escorts couldn't stay and linger looking for them. Well, it just so happened the Tiger heading towards Woods Hole came across the U-boat.
Oh my goodness.
And they sank the U-boat, killing all aboard.
Wow.
And the crewmen they were dropped off in Woods Hole.
Wow, that is quite a bit of activity for something that no one expected, right?
And nobody,
serendipitous.
It was secret because you couldn't publicize the canal was closed for 2 weeks because the enemy would know.
Right,
so this stuff is not in the papers, but it happened.
Exactly.
We have the story.
Probably a lot is not in the papers. That's a really good point in
Engineer
general,
Amphibious
I think.
Command was founded in 1942 on the Cape, and all their activity, you couldn't take a photograph of the duck boat, which had scientific trials on the Cape, because, again, all top secret.
Yeah, yeah.
So the people have no idea. There were 42 anti-aircraft battalions.
Is
trained.
that the bunkers that I've read about, that they're actually bunkers in Sagamore Beach?
No, that's from Sagamore Hill.
Okay.
Where a 155 millimeter cannon called the Vicious Virgin, because it was never fired in anger, protected Cape Cod Bay from invasion. There were actually two of them.
Okay.
And there were two 155 millimeter cannon in Provincetown, so the entire bay was covered with these 4 cannon.
Yeah, I was thinking.
And those are the
hiking
ammo
around.
bunkers. You can go up to Sagamore Hill, and the ammo bunkers are still there, and the Panama mounts that the 155 millimeter cannon were on are still there.
I wonder how many people have stumbled upon those and gone, what are these?
Yeah, the Sagamore Hill, there was a little barracks. I think 100 and something plus soldiers were there, and they had some 50 caliber machine guns to repel them on the beach. We were much more paranoid about a German invasion than we should have been.
Right, but you don't know. Yeah,
the British Navy was in between us and them, But the U-boat activity was real. The co-founder of the Cape Cod Military Museum, Jerry Ellis, as a child, his uncle was in the State Guard, which took over some of the duties of the Mass Guard because the Mass Guard had been activated, and so he was in this State Guard. He woke young Jerry up and drove him to the beach to show him a burning oil tanker off the coast of Cape Cod and told him to remember this site. And again, nobody could talk about it and all that stuff.
Right,
like that.
right. All the untold stories here. There are many,
Yeah.
many. When you listen to you talk, you're like, oh my gosh, untold stories. They were untold because they weren't supposed to be told at the time. But now, we could tell them.
George Bush is not proud, but in 1944, Otis and Hyannis and Martha's Vineyard were taken over as air stations by Quonset Point. So the smooth, easy way of saying it would be Auxiliary Naval Air Station, Quonset Point, Otis.
Yeah, I never.
And the same thing was for Hyannis. And George Bush crashed his Avenger.
Oh, really?
And he was the youngest pilot in U.S. military history. He became a pilot at 18. And what happened was he was landing, and the Avenger is a very large torpedo bomber. It could put a whole torpedo inside itself. It's a 3-man crew. But he took his plane and he landed too close to the plane in front of him, and the turbulence coming off of that plane caused him to dip a wing and slide off the runway. Nobody was injured, but he totaled the plane. And what was the name of the plane?
Disaster? I don't know. What was it?
Think.
Barbara?
Barbara.
Oh, of course it was.
They both married the first person they'd ever kissed. And he was shot down in Barbara 3. Wow. In the Pacific when he was bombing the radar station at Chichijima, which is off the shore of Iwo Jima.
Well, I just wanted to ask, I think you told me that at one point you might have had space in the Kennedy?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, like, where you might end up, or where do you think you might end up, or have you had any good leads, or,
We've had some close calls here and there. The basement of the Kennedy, the basement of the Air and Space Museum, but everything's fallen through. We've had bad luck with it. And the funny thing is, I think would be a really good draw. The interest in World War II is not going down. You had Masters of the Air, Churchill. There's still quite a bit of interest, and there's interest in the grandchildren of World War II veterans, are interested in what Grandpa did. I think would be a draw. I did a lecture a couple of years ago about the Cradle of Invasion to the Cape Cod Tour Guide Association, and they were chomping in the bit for us to open a location because it's mainly couples, and the men love going to the Heritage Museum because of the car collection.
Yeah.
But they're not as thrilled with the Glass Museum or the Doyley Museum or the Art Gallery. And they said if they had the Military Museum, that love that. And what our hope is that somebody will give us a break to get started, and we'd become a draw. Bus tours would stop. People would stop rainy day tourism.
I always thought this was more than just a room in a place. Am I correct in thinking that you have grander, you're looking to be your own place, or you're looking to be a place within something?
Again, once we get started, we'll be able to grow with more volunteers, income. We have no income stream. That's why we did the fundraising concert. And we plan on doing another VJ Day concert in Harwich. Similar theme. We're going to show hundreds of Cape Cod photographs while the sand dune, the big band plays for us. So again, we're very active in the community. We've helped the Bourne Historical Society with military displays. In fact, we had a D-Day display last year. The D-Day display we had at the Falmouth Museum on the Greens just came down in April.
Oh, okay. So you can kind of do.
Yeah, we helped the Katuitt Historical Society
almost
with their display on Camp Canduit, which was a amphibious base in World War II. So we're very active in the community, but we just don't have a permanent location. And I think wherever we do go, we're going to be a draw. The idea would be you get a busload of tourists from the tour. The guys go in, they linger, the women go shop nearby stores, they meet somewhere for lunch. So we'd be a magnet and help all the other stores around us, because as we all know with Amazon, local real estate is, retail sales are in trouble. And again, you can't send the museum experience out with an Amazon driver. So it would be something that would draw people in.
Well, and strangely enough, well, maybe it's not the strange, but being in such a touristy location, Bourne is surprisingly untouristy. Like, we don't have a lot of places that tourists just go. We have events that happen, which is some of what I'm doing.
The canal is probably your biggest
a draw,
vendor, you know.
And
but I don't know if that's
the cemetery is actually I don't know if a draw is the right word, but it's notable, and people do come to visit that, which is also another probably, you know, people who would be interested in what you're doing here. In fact, I think they have a little, they have a display there. I know I've seen some of the, maybe it's from you guys, I don't know, but they had some outfits, the uniforms on display and some.
Yeah, we have hundreds of uniforms, we have artifacts, books, photographs, and most importantly, we have stories. We just did one on the canal, on the sinking of the Jones, but there's a zillion other stories out there.
Where is it stored? Or is it stored in different places?
There are some very unhappy women because of their husband's basements. We have a storage pod at the Bourne Storage Society. We have a storage facility rental at the fountain. That's one of the reason we have to raise money. Is we have expenses with no income.
Right. Yeah,
we certainly
it's a tough
would.
Thing.
Are looking for somewhere that would have like a classroom size space available that we could secure, because even though we have these storage areas, everything's in bins and stacked on each other. We're not able to do an inventory. We're not able to organize, because if you lose one box, that's all you have room for, you know. So a larger storage area where we could actually organize an inventory.
So, you know, I'm going to just say to the camera that, you know, if there are people out there who have any thoughts on this, I actually was not planning on giving out the contact information right away, but I think I will, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you are interested in learning more, or want to talk to Joe and tell him, you know, you want to volunteer or give money or something, his phone number is, and it's going to appear on the screen too, 774-487-0325. And I'm going to give out your email too.
Sure.
Okay. Which is Joe, J-O-E, and his last name, Yukna, Y-U-K-N-A, @gmail.com. So, you know, you could help.
And if I could interject,
sure.
Our website is very static. It doesn't really change. I give a volunteer that's maintaining it for us. But our Facebook page is very active.
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
And we do a monthly newsletter, and you can sign up for the newsletter to know about events that are upcoming and what we're doing, and you can contact us through that. So our Facebook page is very active. In fact, I do a once a day post of something that happened exactly 80 years ago.
Gotcha.
Today, when of course it'll go through World War II, and then in 47 we'll start the preliminary, the 85th anniversary. The 85th anniversary of the Germans invading Poland. You know what I mean? It's a 5-year cycle, anyways.
Yeah.
But like today, there was a battle in Luzon. The Philippines, the 25th, was fighting for Leyte Pass, because that was still, you know, the Pacific War was still going on. We had a big VE Day concert celebration last Saturday. But again, the Pacific War was still going on.
Right, and during that celebration, you had quite a few photos that you were displaying. So there's a lot of that as well, which I expect is also on Facebook a little bit, right?
Yeah. A lot of. If you scroll backwards, you'll find tons of stories and information.
Yeah,
And
that's
we're
a
still
great way
getting-
to get
we're-
introduced to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, we've just contacted a woman who's with an organization that the 350 Girls, which is celebrating 350,000 women that served in World War II. Mm-hmm. And she's doing a deep dive on the uniform that we just got in on this particular woman. So
Yeah, like where did this
we're gonna have a
uniform come from? Do you know who the
a
person
caretaker
is?
of the woman, just before she passed away, brought it in to us. But
Yeah.
he didn't have that much information on her military history and
Yeah,
stuff like
too
that.
bad, right? I
But,
know. I'm thinking about, like, I had an aunt who was in. She was a nurse, and she went to China at one point. I don't know. You know, she was a Navy nurse, and they.
Sure.
You know, there's
Well,
all kinds of
they were-
stuff like that.
5,000 nurses trained at Camp Edwards. Camp Edwards was,
Oh, really?
in the 45, the largest rehabilitation hospital, convalescent hospital
Of
in
course.
America. That's why we have the Red Cross helmet here. To
Ah,
remind me to
which
talk
is-
about that. The German POWs,
heavy.
this is the
Yeah.
red.
Yeah.
The German POWs that we had 2,000 at a time on the base, we cycled through 5,000, would actually work at the hospital taking care of wounded Americans. In fact, you could rent out German POWs if you wanted your house painted. You'd say,
Oh,
send
wow.
over 5 guys. You had to pay them.
Right.
And they were
I'm
on
sure.
escort,
Yeah.
picking cranberries, picking strawberries. After the hurricane of 44, there was a tremendous amount of trees down. Well, these German POWs ended up running 6 sawmills on Camp Edwards, and they cut over 7 million board feet of lumber
Oh, from all the down
from all the down trees. In fact, you would get paid if they took a tree off your property, and of course, they're getting paid to work sawmills.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it went to the war effort building of the barracks and everything
Oh, I
else
bet
like
there are
that. So-
people still around here who could tell you stories about some of the things.
Yeah,
that
there were
happened like
13
that.
chapels on the
Yeah.
base, and a lot of them were moved. So a lot of the chapels and churches on Cape Cod are actually that way. There are cottages and houses.
Yeah, I was
that
going
were
to say
the-
the tendrils of the base reach
After
into
the war,
Bourne pretty deep.
you could buy
Well, Grey Gables,
an officer's
right? Yeah.
mess hall for $1.
Oh,
you
people
could
did
take
that and then moved them?
Right, and if you ever see a house
Huh.
that's built wrong, in other words, it's a rectangle, but the entrance is on the short side, not the long side, that's because it was originally a mess hall.
Wow.
And you'll see them at the beach and stuff like that. They brought them as cottages for the beach and
Yeah,
stuff
I
like that.
imagine that's
so
where a
again,
lot
if
of
you
them-
see a house with a door on the wrong end, not in the middle of the long side, it probably was a mess hall or garage or something small, one of the small buildings on Camp Edwards that was transferred
Yeah,
over.
I can imagine that once you got into this, you could do like almost a walking tour. Well, maybe it wouldn't be walking because I think things are pretty spread out, but to sort of point this out because every once in a while, like a piece of that kind of information will kind of filter into me and I'll be like, really? That was that? You know, it's just, that's so interesting. I mean, that's kind of what has, you know, what kind of piqued my interest in this is I'm like, this is just, it's so impactful. When you live in Bourne, I've lived here for 20 years, you start to realize like just how much impact having that base there
And a lot
has
of the
had on
residents of
community.
Bourne are ex-servicemen. We
Right,
have one of the
or
higher,
they're for, you
one
know,
of the
family.
highest retired because they were stationed at Camp Edwards or Otis, and they enjoyed the Cape so much. They retired. They came back and settled in Bourne. I think Bourne has one of the highest percentage of retired military in it.
Yeah, so I
because of
guess
that reason,
that's
they
why
fell
I've
in
always
love.
sort of thought like, why doesn't this pick up more steam? So that was, you know, sort of what prompted me to get in touch with you was I was just like, you know, this is just something that I feel like a lot of people would be interested in if they realized what's happening.
The
you
people
know?
that come to my lectures and the people that come to my events are thrilled with it. And you know, again,
So it
the
bears
question I
that
still
out.
have is, why don't we have our own place? I'm a history buff. I'm not organized, business-wise,
Well, you can't do
financial-wise, and stuff
everything
like that.
anyway. It's
Yeah,
kind of that's not going to work, and you know that. I mean, starting something is hard, as you're
we are
aware,
a
I'm sure.
501c3 charity, so we do have that.
That's very good,
out of the
actually.
way.
Yeah.
So we do have that going for us.
Yeah, and that's not easy to achieve, so that's good that that's happened already, you know. But there's just a lot of steps involved, and there's a lot of fits and starts, and it takes persistence.
And our story grows all the stuff we have to tell. I mean, we had Gertrude Lawrence, a famous actress, who performed
I even
for
know
the
that name. Yeah.
She was the original Anna and the King. She
Oh,
bought the rights
right,
to
right,
the,
yeah.
Anna and the King and made it The King and I. Yeah, she won a Tony for it and then died right afterwards. She bought the Coonamessett Club and turned it into the Falmouth Playhouse.
Oh, interesting.
which-
Interesting.
And her husband owned the Dennis Playhouse. She brought all kinds of New York famous actors to come do summer stock here because they didn't have air conditioning. So there was no real summer theater in New York City because the theaters were too hot.
They were too hot. Yeah, that would make sense.
So
Yeah.
you have these actors out of work, and her charisma and draw, she got them to come down and perform on the
Interesting,
Cape.
because there is a very, I mean, if you want to talk about a rich
I mean,
history,
our strong theater,
theater is,
our strong theater history really goes back to her and her getting all these superstars to come.
Yeah, and it is strong. Like, I remember when I moved here, I was like, wow, there's a lot going on here. Community and sort of semi-professional. It's just like, it is amazing. You know, it is, the Cape is very interesting in that, and that it does have a draw for all kinds of people, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that could be a whole lecture you could do on how Gertrude Lawrence affected
yeah, I'm sure
the,
we could come up with, like, you know, at least another 10 topics for your
people
lectures.
don't know who she was because, like I said, she passed away before television. There were 500 TV sets in New York City when she died. But she was such a star when the British anti-aircraft unit was training and doing demonstrations, because the Anti-Aircraft Training Command was located in Camp Edwards. They built a 400-seat bleacher section for an escort and neck sandwich, which was an anti-aircraft range, for one performance.
Wow. Were there, well, I was going to say, did they do performances for troops and stuff like that?
Yes, she sponsored the American Theater Wing, a theater company on Camp Edwards who would perform for.
I bet that would be lovely.
There was no
to look
TV.
into. Yeah.
There was very limited radio. A hit song, the sheet music would sell because you'd play the song if you liked it.
Yeah, that was a big thing. Yeah.
So the public would do theaters, and let's put on a show. You know, those Jimmy, Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland movies. That was a thing, putting on a show. In fact, one of the odd things I found was doing research for Washburn at War was the Texas 36 Tank Destroyer Battalion did a play that was so good they went to USOs on the Cape to perform for civilians.
Oh, interesting.
You know,
Yeah,
you know.
Well,
So you
so
think
of
of
course it
civilians-
was so good. Yeah, because they had a lot of good people, I'm sure.
Well,
you know.
they actually, they wanted it up in Boston. They had to perform it whenever a visiting general came in. So apparently it was pretty humorous.
Interesting. Love to find that one, huh?
But yeah, they had a lot of drag characters, which actually they thought was funny. But any person who was homosexual or transvestite would have been drubbed out of the military.
Yeah, I know.
So-
An interesting point as well.
Yeah.
So now, what do you think, what are your next steps? Like, what do you envision, like, progressing here? What's going to happen next, do you think?
Well, again, we're hoping that we can talk to a landlord that would want us to be an anchor somewhere to draw people in. Again, a small starter location that we can expand upon.
And you'd like to
Within
be in Bourne or Sandwich or
Falmouth,
Mashpee,
Mashpee,
Falmouth, like that sort
area,
of upper,
Hyannis,
yeah.
you know, right? Beggars can't-
Anywhere.
anywhere that would open a door for us right now, because
Yeah.
again, the whole Cape was involved.
Yeah.
There's Camp Wellfleet, anti-aircraft training. Escort Neck was an anti-aircraft training. Pompanesett was an anti-aircraft training range. Bourne had its anti-aircraft training range on it, on the base proper. There were Washburn Island is an amphibious training center. Camp Can Do It in Katuitt was an amphibious training center. Osterville had Camp Had Done It, or Have Done
I
It.
was just going to say, come on
which
now. Can do it, had done it.
Well,
you
it's
know.
Katuitt, so they had Can Do It, and then they play on words, have done it was the next one over. A lot of the yacht building facilities, boat building facilities on the Cape, built military watercraft.
That makes perfect sense.
You get the blueprint.
Yep.
They, you know, because
they build stuff.
Chrysler, whoever had the blueprints, didn't care. They couldn't produce enough boats for the military demand. So so they had boat building going on all over the place, making landing craft, making control boats, rescue boats, kind of like a PT boat. They made PT boats in Bourne. The Kingman, I think, is the name of the yacht.
Say that again.
I think it was the Kingman.
Oh yeah. There's still the Kingman Yacht Center.
Yeah, they built like 23
I don't know if they
military.
do building there still, but there's quite a few boat builders here.
The Warriors, they built, I think, at 23.
Yeah, it's a pretty big,
yeah.
setup there.
So again, it was such an active thing. One of the other things I want to do when I get time is to write a book about Cape Cod in World War II. I've got a name, I've got a title, Sword Arm of Sand. Because
all right, look for that.
Down the road. So how do you write a book? I don't know. So
other people have figured it out. I'm sure you can.
Again, just because we get these stories, and unfortunately the stories are going away because I've been hearing stories from veterans and things like that. When Camp Evans was constructed, 18,000 carpenters a day came over the bridges. The bridges were both one way in the morning going on Cape and one way going off Cape in the evening. And a young man applied for a job as a carpenter, and he had no experience, but his uncle was a carpenter. And back in the day, you brought your own tools. So he borrowed his uncle's toolbox, which was this huge box and had all these measuring levels and scales and strings and all this stuff like that. Things he didn't know how to use,
but there they were.
And they took one look at his box and said, "You're a foreman," which was terrific because he didn't actually have to build anything. He'd get the assignments and say, "All right, you guys are building 23, you're building 1024." And so it was perfect because he actually didn't have to do the real carpenters,
probably worked out
the
for
real
the
plumbers.
best. Yeah.
It worked out great because all he had to do was manage people. So again, it's one of the many stories.
Well, I am gonna, start ending our conversation, but I really want to thank you for this, and
Thank you.
Wish you the best of luck. I hope there are people out there watching who are interested and want to help you. You have the contact information. It's an exciting opportunity, and for those who are watching, get in touch with the man, because if you're interested, they need volunteers, right? They need money, they need a place, but they have a great concept, and things just have to come together. So it could be a great community effort. You are welcome. I'm going to put on my traveling hat because it's time for me to go to my mystery location where we're going to explore a little bit of another untold story, Joe, another untold story. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. All right, hey folks, I'm here at my mystery location today, which is rather nondescript at this moment, but holds some interesting Bourne history. So it's about 30 years ago now, and I'm thinking there may be people who are watching this who may have attended performances at Theater on the Bay, which was once at Trading Post Corners, also known as Five Corners in Bourne Village. From what I've understood, having read this little book and heard from other theatrical people who live in the area, Edward Gorey produced some shows here at Theater on the Bay. I'm just going to read a little bit, and also I believe on screen we'll be showing some of the posters for some of those shows. Theater on the Bay was the site of several firsts. Blithering Christmas was the first script Edward wrote as a full-length play, rather than assembled from old and new work into an entertainment. Salome by Oscar Wilde was his first shot at directing a play he didn't write. His first all-puppet show, aside from human narrators, was Heads Will Roll. And his first Cape Cod production that traveled where Heads Will Roll was reprised at the MBL Club in Woods Hole, and Stumbling Christmas at Pepper's Cafe in Hyannis. So all these theatricals were going on. I have no idea where that happened, but I would love to get more information if anyone out there can give me any about the history of theater on the Bay, what it looked like, any experiences that you had. Feel free, please, to contact me through the Bourne Community TV. And with that, we've reached the end of our show. And on behalf of myself and the Bourne Community Engagement Committee, I'm thrilled that you watched today. And just a reminder, life isn't about finding yourself, life is about creating yourself. Have a great day.